In this lesson, we'll be learning how to move data from our AWS RDS service into an S3 bucket using Amazon Kinesis data streams and Amazon Kinesis Firehose delivery streams. Here we see an overview of the whole architecture of this solution. In our current example, we have an Amazon RDS instance set up with sample data and a sample S3 bucket. We're going to create Kinesis data and delivery streams to ingest the data from RDS and distribute it into our S3 bucket. And connecting these services is going to be the database migration service. Amazon DMS is largely used to migrate data warehouses and/or NoSQL databases into the AWS cloud, or between combinations of cloud and on-premises setups. But this lesson will demonstrate its functionality as a producer for Kinesis data streams. Although this will be a straightforward example, a more practical application for the use of Kinesis to capture real-time data from RDS would be to stream data warehouse changes into S3. Capturing every change from transactions in a source database and moving them to the target in real time keeps the system synchronized and helps with real-time analytics use cases and zero downtime database migrations. For our purposes, we're going to configure an Amazon Kinesis data stream, configure a Kinesis Firehose delivery stream that outputs to an S3 bucket, create a policy that allows putting records to Amazon Kinesis, and a role using that policy for DMS, create a database replication instance in DMS, create source and target endpoints, create a database migration task, and finally verify that the tables were loaded successfully. Start by logging into your AWS Management Console with a user that has the permissions necessary to complete the task that we've outlined. If you've used Kinesis recently, you'll see it in your recently visited, but otherwise you can use the search bar, type in Kinesis, and go ahead and click the result that comes up. And we'll start by creating the data stream. So go to Create Data Stream. We'll give it a name that'll be easy to find later, so Example Data Stream. And then we have some options to specify about the stream capacity. Now there is an on-demand option that automatically scales up or down depending on the required throughputs. But to understand how Amazon Kinesis data streams work in a little more detail, let's actually look at the options under Provisioned. Data streams in Kinesis are made up of provisioned shards. These are units of data throughput. And when you're using the provisions setting, you can specify a number of shards, and you can change that after the stream is already in flight. You can merge or split shards if you need to change the capacity later on. Each shard has a particular write and read capacity. And data that enters the data stream is retained for 1 day, but we can extend that to up to 7 days. And that's one of the options that is editable after creation. Otherwise, there's not a lot to set up with your data stream. So from here, we can just click Create Data Stream. One thing that we do want to make sure that we do is copy the ARN. We're going to need this later on in this lesson. So go ahead and drop it into a document where you can easily find it later. That way you don't have to navigate back to this page. Paste that. Now we can go back to Kinesis here, or in the navigation pane, just click Delivery Streams. And we'll create a delivery stream that's going to take the data from our data stream and put it into our S3 buckets. So click Create Delivery Stream. This time we don't get to specify the name. First, we have to give the source and the destination. So for the source, we'll click Kinesis Data Streams. And for the destination, Amazon S3. And I've already got a bucket set up. We'll see that in just a moment. Here we have the option to actually browse and select these assets from these other services. So for Kinesis Data Stream, we can click Browse, find the stream that we just created, and choose. Now it does want us to name the delivery stream. And it's just taking a little while to delete the characters. So I'll call this example dash Kinesis dash firehose. Leave the transform and convert records options blank. And again, we'll select our S3 bucket using the browse button. So this is the bucket that I've set up for this demo. We can specify a prefix and an error prefix to better find these assets when we go to our S3 bucket later. I'm going to leave those blank for now. And for the buffer hints, compression and encryption, I'm going to change the buffer size to 1 and the buffer interval to 60 seconds. Leave everything else at its defaults and click Create Delivery Stream. This is going to take a second to pop us back out onto the Kinesis page, but once it does, we should see that the delivery stream was created right away. And there we have the successfully created message. So we've got our data stream and our delivery stream. We're kind of going to be working backwards into our connection to our RDS. But before we go into DMS, the first thing that we're going to need to do is create a policy that basically lets DMS put records into our Kinesis data stream, and then a role for DMS that's going to give it access to do that. So in the search bar, we'll type in IAM for Identity and Access Management. Click that. We'll go ahead and go into Policies and select Create Policy. We're actually going to go to the JSON tab, and I've got a block of code that I've prepared ahead of time for this. And all we need to do is provide the ARN from the Kinesis data stream. That's why I suggested dropping it into a separate document so that you can easily go and copy it and drop it here. So if you're following along with this example, go ahead and pause the video here and fill it all out. But I'm going to go ahead and select Next. We don't need to add tags, so we'll hit Next Review. Going to try to give everything a consistent naming convention. So example, Kinesis policy. I could add a description, but I'm going to skip that for now. And we'll select Create Policy. And having done that, we can see the example Kinesis policy right here. Next, we'll go into roles. And we'll create a role. So this is going to be for an AWS service. For the use case, we want DMS. It's not available in the defaults on my screen. So I'm going to click the drop-down, type in DMS, select the first thing that comes up, and then finally check the radio button for DMS. Hit Next. This looks like a screen we were just at, but it's actually asking us what permission we want to add to this role. So we'll select the policy that we just created. If we hadn't created one already, we could have done here, Create Policy. So now you go down to the bottom and select Next. And then we're going to give a name for the role, again following this relatively simple naming convention. Example, Kinesis role. There was helpfully a description automatically generated. And then just a few more things, information on the configuration, but we can hit Create Role. All right, and then we get a message saying that the role was successfully created. So now we can move on to DMS. At this point, we have our data stream, a delivery stream linking the data stream to S3, a policy allowing permission to send records into the data stream, and a role that will let Amazon DMS use that permission. All that's left is to configure DMS to replicate our database into our data stream. Go ahead and navigate to Amazon DMS. We have 4 things to do to configure the necessary architecture. Create a database replication instance, create source and target endpoints, and create a database migration task. To get started, click Replication Instances. Go ahead and create replication instance. Give it a name so we can find it later. We can leave everything else blank. And actually, we can, for the most part, keep the default configurations, except for multi-AZ, we do need to, it says choose a failover setting. So we'll set a production workload multi-AZ. Leave the storage by default. Everything else the way it is. Nothing to do in advanced settings. And so we'll click Create Replication Instance. This is the part of this that's going to take the longest. We can see it creating down here. And it's really something that we should wait to finish before we go to create our source and target endpoints. Because if this is set up before we create those, we can test the endpoints as we create them. And we need successful tests of them before we can actually run the database migration tasks. So I'm going to pause the video here and come back once this is created. But just so you know, this is going to take a while. So now our example Kinesis replication instance is successfully created, and we'll be able to run tests on the endpoints to make them. So now we're going to go into endpoints on the navigation page. So we're going to create 2 endpoints. The first is going to be the source endpoint. And we can actually check the box to select an RDS database instance. They have this built in for us. Endpoint identifier has been pre-filled, but it's actually the name of the endpoint that we're trying to create. So we're going to specify one ourselves. Example Kinesis source endpoint. And the source engine is going to be Microsoft SQL Server because that is the source engine being used for my database. Click the option for Provide Access Information manually so that you can specify the server name of your RDS database, your port number, and then your admin username and password. You'll have to enter in the password yourself. And this is set up once you, when you set up your database, it gives you the RDS master username and RDS master password. So I'm going to copy this, paste that in. The database where I have my data is called employee data. So I'm going to type in the database name. Go into endpoint settings. There's nothing to put here, so we can leave that all blank. And open up the dropdown for test endpoint connection. Make sure you select the replication instance that you're trying to use. So ours is example Kinesis replication instance, and select run test. This takes a moment, but not terribly long, so we'll wait for it to run. All right, that's successful. So we're going to click create endpoint. So now we've got our source endpoint. We're going to need to create a target endpoint. This is going to be specifying essentially the connection to our Kinesis data stream from DMS. So target endpoints, for the endpoint identifier, example, Kinesis, target endpoints. And for the target engine, we want Amazon Kinesis. We need 2 things that we specified already. One is the service access role ARN. So go ahead and open up your IAM management console. Find the role that you made earlier and click on it. And you can see the ARN here. So we're going to copy that, drop it here. And we need the Kinesis stream ARN that we dropped in a document earlier. Leave everything else blank and go down to test endpoint connection. And we're going to test this one as well. Once we get our successful status on this test, we can click Create Endpoints. So now we have our source and target endpoints. We can finally do our last task, which is creating the database migration task. So click that in the navigation pane over here. Go to Create Task. The task identifier, again, example, Kinesis migration task. We need to select the replication instance that we created for this example. Select the source endpoints. Select the target endpoints. Now, if you had configured your database for change data capture, here's where you can put into use that use case of migrating not only your database, but your ongoing changes to replicate into your S3 bucket. But we're going to keep it simple and migrate existing data only. Keep everything else on its defaults. The last thing we need to specify is table mapping. So under selection rules, we'll select add new selection rule. Under the dropdown for schema, put enter a schema. And here you would specify the schema and the table names from your database. If you want to grab everything from the database that you specified, you can just leave the wildcard characters here. You want to make sure to select include as the action. And I want this task to run as soon as it's created. So we're going to leave the radio button for automatically on create selected and go to create task. This is going to be the last part of this that's going to take a little bit of time. So I'm going to pause the video here and come back when this is done. Once the migration task has completed, we'll see load complete on the status and progress bar at 100%. We can actually click into the migration task itself to view table statistics and verify that our tables were all loaded. So this is everything that was in that database. And we can see the rows that were created. So I have one fact table and several dimension tables. So this has been all loaded into our S3 bucket as an object. And we're finally done. We've successfully created an Amazon Kinesis data stream, a Kinesis delivery stream. We established a policy and a role for DMS to connect to Kinesis, and configured and run a DMS replication instance with endpoints and a database migration task, all to pull our RDS tables into an S3 bucket. Thank you for watching. Hope this was helpful.